It began with a sound that didn't belong. A soft knock, or not on the door, not on the shutters, but somewhere inside the walls. Agnes, the maid of the old rectory, froze where she stood with her arms deep in the wash basin. The water had gone still. The soap floated quietly at the surface. And the sound came again, a low, deliberate tapping, as though someone hidden deep in the timber wanted her to know they were there. She told herself it was only the house settling, the beams adjusting as the evening chill crept through the stone. Houses made noises, especially old ones. And this one was very old. The rectory had stood for over 2 centuries, a sagging relic of damp brick and uneven floors, kept alive by the thin charity of the church. Most of the servants had left years ago, complaining of drafts, of shadows, of voices in the empty halls. But Agnes had nowhere else to go. She was young, poor, and quiet, and so the priest kept her on. Her life was a pattern of mending clothes, scrubbing floors, and carrying buckets of water across corridors that never seemed to end. She did not complain. She tried not to notice the things that were slightly wrong. Like the chapel candles that burned lower in the night than in the morning. Like the portraits whose eyes seemed to look past her shoulder, towards something behind. Like the faint smell of smoke, always present, though no fire had been lit in years. The priest told her she was fanciful. And so she folded her fears as neatly as she folded the altar cloths, and placed them away. But the knocking, it had begun 3 nights ago. At first it came only once, when she was carrying linens down the servants' passage. A hollow sound, from the paneling just beside her. She paused, pressed her ear against the wood. Nothing. The silence afterwards seemed deeper, like the hush before prayer. The next night, it came twice. Slow, deliberate, as if the thing inside wanted her to wait for it. And now, tonight, it came again. 3 knocks. Each one steady, each one impossibly human. She dried her hands, turned away from the basin, and forced herself to continue her work. The laundry must be done. The bread must be baked. The house did not care about her fear. But as she crossed the dim kitchen, the small oil lamp in her hand trembled. Its light wavered over the stone walls, caught on the iron hooks, on the blackened hearth, and then, for just a moment, on the outline of wet footprints. They led from the back door to the center of the kitchen, and stopped where she stood. Agnes stared at them. The water had pooled faintly, as though someone had stood there only moments before, barefoot. The prints were small, the child's perhaps, but they dripped steadily, though no one was there. She did not scream. She simply lifted the lamp higher, watching as the shadows stretched and curled like smoke against the ceiling. The priest had always told her, the devil finds his way in through fear. Do not speak to it. Do not acknowledge it. Carry on. And so she did. She stepped around the prince, placed the bread in the oven, and continued her chores, though her hands trembled so much she could barely lace the shutters. All that night, the knocking followed her, from the pantry walls, from the stairwell beams, from beneath the floor of her own narrow room. It was not loud. It was never loud. Just enough to remind her that she was not alone. By morning, the priest found her pale and sleepless, her eyes hollow, her lips moving silently in prayer. She tried to explain. The sounds, the footprints, the sense of something watching. But he dismissed her gently. It was her imagination, her woman's nerves, the weariness of her endless duties. He placed a hand on her head, murmured a blessing, and told her to rest. But Agnes did not rest. That evening, as the priest prepared for Vespers, Agnes lingered in the chapel. It was the only room in the house where she felt some measure of safety. The air was heavy with incense, the stained glass windows bleeding pale light across the floor. She sat near the altar, her hands folded, whispering words she barely remembered. And then she heard it. Not a knock. Not a tap. But a whisper. It came from the darkened choir loft above. Low, broken words, drawn out like breath forced through water. She could not understand them, but she knew they were meant for her. She rose, her feet echoing on the flagstones. The whispering ceased. Silence spread over the chapel like dust. And then, the sound of something small dragging itself across the wooden loft floor. A shiver ran down her back. She did not climb the stairs. She fled. From that night forward, the house began to change. Her chores no longer followed their rhythm. The bread spoiled faster, as though someone had touched it with unclean hands. The well water grew cloudy, reflecting not her face but something pale and open-eyed just behind her. The air grew damp with the smell of rot, even in the sunlit hours. The priest noticed too, though he would not say it aloud. He prayed longer in the chapel. His hands trembled over the Bible. He walked the halls with a candle, glancing always toward the corners where the shadows pulled too deeply. Agnes wondered if he heard the knocking as well. She never asked. The silence between them was safer. Weeks passed like this. A slow decay, as though the house itself were sinking into the earth, dragging its occupants down with it. The knocking grew bolder. Sometimes it came from the bedposts. Sometimes it came from the inside of the cupboard while she folded linens. Once, as she carried water through the corridor, the bucket trembled in her hands, because the sound came not from the walls but from inside the water itself. On the last night, Agnes did not try to sleep. She sat in the kitchen with her lamp, watching the door, listening. The house was utterly silent. Too silent. Then came the footsteps. Soft, wet, and slow, crossing the corridor toward her. They stopped just beyond the door frame. The lamp flickered. The smell of smoke grew thick, burning her throat. And then, a child's voice. Very faint. Calling her name. She gripped the lamp tighter, her knuckles white, her breath caught in her chest. Agnes, it was not a child. She knew it instantly. The voice was too old, too heavy with hunger. The door creaked open on its own. The corridor was empty. But the footprints returned, wet and glistening, stepping slowly into the room. Agnes backed away until her spine pressed to the wall. The lamp shook in her hand. The air turned colder, so cold her breath smoked in the dark. The last thing she saw, before the lamp guttered out, was the outline of something small, crouched low to the ground, its face turned sharply upward, watching her. And then, the knocking began again. Louder now. Every wall, every beam, every surface of the house pounding in unison. It did not stop. Not that night. Not the nights that followed. Not even after the rectory was abandoned, and Agnes's name was spoken only in whispers. The knocking remains. And if you listen closely, on a quiet evening, you may hear it still. 3 steady knocks. Waiting.